You've met Mike Beck before, I think, haven't you? He's our host today.
I've heard you teach many times. I don't know. I'm sure we've met.
I'm
I've
sure
heard
we
you
have
teach.
too.
Yeah.
Good morning, Mike.
Nice to meet you. Carolyn, have at it whenever you're ready to start. No.
Oh yeah, we've got, let people join in probably about
Okay.
8:45. I'll do my little introduction of Laura, and then Laura can open with her prayer and move on. There comes Julie back with her coffee.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Julie.
We miss you.
Oh, thank you. I must say it's kind of nice to be able to teach sitting in my house with a cup of coffee and not having to schlep all the way from Pasadena to Brentwood. Kind of like.
Come on now, it's only 25 minutes on a Sunday morning.
Well, I'm going to go get a refill before you start.
Thank you, Mike, for putting my name on, so I'm not just iPad.
Are you back in Pasadena?
I am back in Pasadena.
Ah, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Good to know. My dog is joining us.
Oh, cute.
I always wonder how many people have their slippers on.
I do.
It's so funny. At our service with the synagogue on Thursday, Michael Gottlieb, the rabbi, confessed that he had his slippers on, and I just was on no video because I had my shoes on, but I had my jammies on because I was cooking.
Well, doing therapy on Zoom, sometimes people are sitting on the floor of their bathroom with their back against the bathtub because it's the only quiet place in their house, or people will be in their cars, or it's a very different way of doing therapy. I enjoy it sometimes to get to see a little slice of their life.
Hi, Pam. She's on mute.
I don't know how to get it to stop saying admin and start saying my name.
I go through the same thing. Why don't you tell Mike? Mike can change it.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm just iPad. So it's so nice. We still have some, there's Jody, Mary Beth.
Who, admin? Hey, admin, I'm Mike. What's your name?
Joyce.
Joyce.
Oh, Joyce.
Hey,
Joyce.
How are you, North Carolina?
I have a little thumbnail of you on here. We've actually met, but I just didn't recognize you by the tiny image I have of you on here. But I'm going to put your name on here.
Oh, thank you.
Somehow Joyce is related to Bill, somehow in a distant way. I forget what it is. Somehow to the Thackers.
Yes, exactly.
You muted everybody.
Oh, there I am. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Oh, you're welcome.
That's much nicer than admin.
Yes.
Yes, that's nice.
That's right. Put a name to the face.
So, Carolyn, I'm scrambling. I know Laura always mutes everybody when Laura always mutes everybody when Laura starts.
Yes.
I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So when you start, I'll just ask, or you can, or I can just ask everybody just to mute themselves.
Yeah, right. I'll just ask everybody to mute themselves, and then.
But you did mute everybody.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
I don't think she did. I don't think he did. I had to unmute.
I had to mute you on purpose, Jody. That was what I was doing.
Sorry, Jody.
How you guys doing?
Real good.
Where are you right now, Mike?
Raleigh, North Carolina.
North Carolina.
He's sounding a little bit more Raleigh every day.
Is it
every week.
Is it more than usual?
Yes. At least I hear it.
Yeah.
Your
I've
ear,
had,
out your
I've
mouth.
had, what's that?
I said it goes in your ear and out your mouth.
I've had, I haven't lived in North Carolina for my whole adult life really, but I've had to focus on hanging on to this accent. So I got most of it,
It's charming, so keep it.
I think. Hey, Tony.
He's on mute right now. It's Marianne's birthday today.
Oh my goodness.
Trying to see how many participants. Everybody's rolling in. Oh my, this Paula got up too.
Well, I'm up, but I'm
Like
gonna go
teaser.
get my tea here.
Go get it. We have a minute.
Good morning, Paula.
Oh, Laura, wow, it's so wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
It takes you to get her up to SCL, Laura.
That's true.
She
Well,
will
I'm always-
listen. She will
I'm
listen
always
later.
up.
It's
Yeah.
just,
I'm usually busy getting ready for the day, but I'm always up. But today I'm just putting things aside and
good.
I'm so pleased to be here, frankly.
And Sally, is that a real background of those beautiful flowers?
Sally's muted.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Those were real lilacs, Laura, in the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens. I took the picture a number of years ago, and it
Beautiful.
brings such warm memories of my time in the Brooklyn Gardens. So
Oh, lovely.
Beautiful. Good morning, Mr. Marston Hall.
good morning, sir.
Where is he?
He's right. Well, you have to kind of flip around on, I only have an iPad screen, so I can only get 12 at a time.
Good morning, Liz. Nice to see you.
Good morning, everyone.
It's all the best people. Good morning.
Yes.
Morning, everybody.
Hi, Pat.
Nadja. Paul, where are you? I don't see you.
Well, he's at the bottom of my screen. He's right below you on my screen, Sally.
Hi, Sally.
Good morning,
Everybody.
Hi, Nudge.
Nadja.
Hi.
Unmute
Hi.
yourself, Marianne.
What a treat to see these loving faces.
Isn't it?
Hi.
Oh, we need to talk later and answer your question that you posed yesterday. Your newspaper question.
Okay, why don't we, I know that it's 8:45 and there'll be many more participants and coming in. And I know for many of us, Laura is a very long time friend that has shared our spiritual journeys. And I think it was Bill Barnes that brought Laura to be a speaker at our couples garden one October. In that January, Laura became our retreat leader. And she has been not only a spiritual guide and leader for women at the women's retreats, mini retreats, but spiritual life retreats, numerous SCL classes and officers retreat a couple of times, a wonderful guidance speaker for those of us on session and serving as deacons, and of course, many times in worship in our pulpit. A long time, dear friend and spiritual leader of so many of us. So welcome, Laura. And what I'd like to ask is that everybody put themselves on mute. And then Laura will begin with opening us in prayer, and she will give a little bit of the format of how she's going to be structuring our time together this morning. So welcome to Laura, and welcome all of you participants.
Thank you, Carolyn. And it's really nice to be here, being able, I was saying, to not have to schlep from Pasadena to the west side, and to get to be wearing my warm, fuzzy shearling slippers as we talk. So I'm really happy to be with you this morning, and so nice to see faces of people I haven't seen for a really long time, people I love very much. So thank you for having me, Carolyn. Thank you for asking me. Okay, let's open in prayer. And I would like to ask you, I always like to do this to bring our bodies into prayer as well. Will you put your hands in your lap or somewhere comfortable in kind of the shape of an open vessel, as just a way that we are saying with our whole bodies that we want God to come and to fill us this morning as we're spending this time together. So let's pray together. Oh, loving God, we're here because we want to learn to love better. We really know that that is the only thing in life that matters, is learning to let ourselves be loved, to not let any walls or obstacles keep us from that vulnerable, open position of receiving your love and the love of people around us, and to know better how to give love, how to give ourselves away in love, and how to live rooted and grounded in your love. So God, help us this morning as we listen to different passages of scripture, as we reflect together on where we are in the world right now. And our purpose is just that we would, every single one of us, be able today to learn something from you, God, about what you want from us, to open our heart a little more, to be able to take another step on this lifelong journey of learning to love. So thank you for my dear brothers and sisters here at Brentwood Press and other friends that are joining. And Lord, we love you, and we thank you that you're with us this morning in our homes and all over the place. So thank you, God. In Jesus' name, amen. You have heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. God causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore. Or as many translators say, be whole. Be whole, therefore, as your heavenly Father is whole. Love your enemies, not tolerate them, not have civil discourse with them, but love people that you don't agree with, who might be dangerous, who may have hurt you, or hurt people you love, or hurt ideas that you cherish. This topic of love in an age of polarization is a topic that could be seen as provocative. I want to say right at the outset that we're not going to be talking this morning about politics. This is not about politics. What this is about is the calling that we have as people who are members of the family of God to learn how to love people that disagree with us and how to love people that we actually would even call our enemies. And so what I'm going to do is, rather than stop and have questions while I talk this morning, I'm going to just give some thoughts for, I don't know, let's say maybe a half an hour. And then what I'd love to do, and even if as we go along, if there's questions that come up, what I'd love is for you to write them in the chat. I hope everybody knows how to use the chat feature down at the bottom of your screen. There's a little box, like a message thing, and a word that says chat. And please write your question into the chat section. And then at the end of our time together, I would love to, I have some questions I'd love to throw out for people to respond to, but I also would love to see the questions that are in the chat box as well. And if we don't have time to get to all of them, I would love to respond to any of you personally that would like to have a dialogue about something that comes up for you during this time. I'd like you to raise your hand on your screen if you love someone who disagrees with your political views. I bet that's almost everybody. But what's so sad, a recent poll by the Public Religion Research Institute showed that 8 out of 10 Republicans believe that the Democratic Party has been taken over by socialists, and 8 out of 10 Democrats believe that the Republican Party has been taken over by racists. This report was aptly named Dueling Realities. And we know that that's the context that we live in right now, right? I wonder how many of you have been told by a newspaper columnist or a politician or a college professor or a pastor or a television host that your friends, your family, and your neighbors that are on the other side are fools. And if you have any integrity, you need to stand up to them or leave them behind. That people with a different perspective hate your country and must be destroyed. That if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And that kindness to your ideological foes is tantamount to weakness. Well, where does this lead us? What has this done to our country and our communities and our families? And as Christian people, as people who identify as followers of God, can our faith in God help us find a better way? That's what I'd like to look at together this morning. In the first book of John, 1 John chapter 4, verse 8, there's this powerful small verse. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And then a little later in that chapter, and I'm going to be reading these two verses in the translation of the Message. This is 1 John 4, verses 17 and 18. God is love. And when we take up permanent residence in a life of love, we live in God and God lives in us. This way, love has the run of the house. Love becomes at home and mature in us, so that we're free of worry on Judgment Day. Our standing in the world is identical with Jesus Christ. There is no room in love for fear. Well-formed love banishes fear. Since fear is crippling, a fearful life, fear of death, fear of judgment, is one that is not yet fully formed in love. There's no room in love for fear. And I want to look for a little bit together about this relationship between love and fear and what that might have to do with our current state of polarization. I've learned a lot about love and fear in 2 places in my life. One of them is in my marriage. And I don't know if my husband was on or not, but he better be muted because he's not allowed to talk at this point. But one is my marriage and working with other couples in couples therapy. And the other place I've learned a lot about love and fear are the 4 years that I've worked as a volunteer therapist at Homeboy Industries. It's well documented that anger is a secondary emotion that usually arises from either deep fear or deep sadness. We're all aware that anger is a stage of the grieving process. Often when we are deeply, deeply grieving, how that gets expressed in our human life, our human body, is with anger. We're angry. We're angry at that abandonment. We're angry at that deep sadness. And anger also arises very often from fear. Think of a response you may have had if you were a parent of a child that came home 4 hours late and you had no idea where they were, and they walked in the door and you bit their head off. And it was because you were terrified. So deep fear and deep sadness are almost always the fuel that fuels anger. When I'm angry at my husband, our biggest fights are when I'm afraid that I'm not being seen or heard by him. I'm afraid that I'm not going to be loved the way I want to be loved. I'm afraid that I won't be validated or acknowledged or respected in a way that would make me feel important and precious and cherished to him. And when I feel those things, when I feel afraid of not being seen or loved or respected or validated the way I want to be, in a flash, what are normally very loving and friendly feelings I have towards him can turn into cold hatred. I can be filled with righteous indignation. I don't deserve this. Does anyone relate to that? How quickly, when we feel vulnerable, when we feel afraid that something important to us is being missed, we can flash to this righteous, arrogant anger. At Homeboy, what I've learned doing therapy with former gang members is that so often the anger that has fueled their criminal behavior is rooted in deep, deep trauma of abandonment and abuse that they've incurred from the time they were born. Not being raised by parents, beginning to be introduced to meth by their mother at 9 years old, watching a parent throw the other parent out a glass window, that the abuse and the abandonment and the trauma that they have experienced has bubbled and boiled and become a kind of rage at the unfairness, that their anger is fueled by this trauma and this sadness and this fear. I think one of the things that's also very interesting about fear, and it's been documented in lots of different research, is many people that feel competent and successful don't think they're really afraid of anything. That fear is often not something that we can even see or acknowledge in ourselves. That the fear often that we have may actually be unconscious, but that all of us experience fear at different times. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear that someone in power is going to hurt us or take something away from us. I think that kind of fear that's at the core of a lot of the polarization is one of the things that we don't even always know how to name or acknowledge. But the thing about fear is that when we are feeling fear, we are not using the higher functioning parts of our brain. The limbic system, the emotional brain, the amygdala is the part of our brain, the survival brain. You know, when we're feeling fear, we're in more of a survival place. And so we're not able to even call upon the most evolved parts of our brain, where we're able to learn from the past. We're able to, have different options, brainstorming, be creative. When we're moving out of the limbic system of our brain, it becomes very binary. And this polarization is a result of being, I think, in this threatened state where the world becomes very binary. You are for me or you're against me. It is us versus them. And again, that's one of the things that I've learned. Father Greg Boyle at Homeboy says all the time, there is no us and them, there's only us. What if we took that perspective to what's happening even in our world now with all of the polarization? There is no us and them, there's only us. And one of the things that Father Greg also says all the time is that we move towards the demonized so that demonizing stops. That's the only way we're going to stop demonizing, is when we actually move towards people that have been marginalized or demonized in one way or another, so that we stop doing that to people. But in that state of polarization, you are for me, you are against me. And it's very much like a way of thinking that's actually quite young. Children live in a very binary world, don't they? Things are good or bad. Things are black or white. And what happens, usually, Piaget said that it was around the age of 11 when we can begin abstract thinking. As we mature, hopefully our brains, our cognitive capacity grows and widens and deepens, and we're able to take in a more complicated and nuanced and multi-layered way to look at ourselves and to look at the world. And adults move out of this binary, good, bad, black, white, right, wrong. But in a polarized state, that's exactly where we find ourselves again, isn't it? We're back in our corners, hunkered down. Who are our allies and who are our enemies? In a polarized state, there's no space to talk or to listen. There's no space to be seen or to connect. We shut down to each other, don't we? Our fear has cast out our capacity to love. If there's one thing, again, going back to my marriage, that I've learned about fear and love, if when I feel hurt, or if I feel not seen or heard by my husband, if I can try to remember who he is, remember the person that I know him to be, not just how I'm feeling in that moment, and I can begin to ask some questions about what's going on for him, I can begin to try to have a dialogue about what he might be feeling and what I'm feeling, and we can listen to each other. That's the way that we can move away from that place of our own polarization and fear and connect again. But I can't do that if I'm not even open at all to listening or acknowledging that his perspective, his feelings are just as important as my own. There was a documentary that actually got nominated for an Academy Award in 2014. I just watched it again yesterday. It was nominated in the short category. It was only about a 23-minute film. And the name of it was called Facing Fear. It was the first film by someone named Jason Cohen. And it was an amazing story, a true story of two men, Tim Zoll and Matthew Boger. Matthew Boger, when he was 13 years old, was kicked out of his house when he came out as being gay. His mother, a very staunch Catholic, said that she would not have anyone who would choose to live in sin be under her roof. And at the age of 13, kicked him out, and he began living on the streets in Hollywood. When he was about 16 years old, one night, he was at a hot dog stand somewhere in Hollywood where he would hang out sometimes. And a group of about 14 neo-Nazis with long blades on their boots beat Matthew to the point, thinking that they had left him in an alley for dead. He still today, and you can see on the film, has scars all over his face from the places where the blades on their boots beat him to a pulp, left him in an alley for dead. 25 years later, Matthew Boger was one of the directors at the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles, one of the managers. And there was a young man, or not a young man at that time, there was a man named Tim Zoll, who had volunteered to be one of the people to give, at the Museum of Tolerance, probably most of you have been there, they have testimonies of people, really powerful part of that museum. Sometimes they have testimonies of people that are Holocaust survivors, but they also have testimonies of people like Tim Zoll, who had been a neo-Nazi and came out of that lifestyle and that perspective and told his story about how he acknowledged that he did not want to be in that place of hate anymore. So Matthew Boger meets this new volunteer, Tim Zoll, and they begin talking and telling their story to each other. And Matthew asks Tim what happened that made him decide that he didn't want to live in that white supremacist world any longer. And Tim Zoll started telling the story of different things that had happened in his life. And especially there was this one night when things got very, very violent. And he told the story of what happened to Matthew Boger. And in that moment, as Tim was telling the story, that at that time he'd had a 16-inch mohawk, Matthew had a very clear flashback and knew for sure that it was Matthew that had delivered the kick to his forehead right before he'd gone unconscious. And they realized in that moment, Matthew says to Tim, "You know who you're talking to, don't you?" And Tim told him later that he realized it before Matthew did, that Matthew had been the person that he had brutally attacked that night. So the Museum of Tolerance decided, when they heard about this, they asked Tim and Matthew, would you be willing in front of the people that come to the museum to talk about what it might be like to try to move into a place of forgiveness? Tim, could you talk about what it's like to feel, how could you ever forgive yourself? And Matthew, would you be open to doing this just live so that people could kind of actually see what it would be like to begin conversations in this context? And Matthew says in this film that he did not know that he could forgive him. He said at first, the violent feelings that came up for Matthew when he realized that this was Tim, it said it shocked him the way that he wanted to hurt Tim. He had never had feelings like that of so badly wanting to hurt another person. It frightened him. So that's what actually motivated him to say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to become that. And Tim wasn't sure if he could do that because he felt so much shame and pain all over again, thinking that Matthew had been dead and now having to face the live person who had incurred that violence from him. He didn't want to do it either. But both of them felt that there was something very important about this. So they did decide to start these conversations. And over a period of 6 years, spoke at that museum, began speaking in other classrooms and other settings. And the two of them actually became very, very close friends. And they moved into a place where when Matthew's partner was dying, it was Tim who was his closest confidant and companion during that time of losing his partner. They chose to move from fear and anger through a very vulnerable, risky process into love and forgiveness. If we don't choose to acknowledge that our anger is usually fueled by fear, and we believe that our anger is somehow justified or righteous, we end up in a place of moral outrage. And here's a quote from Father Greg that I like a lot. Moral outrage is the opposite of God. It only divides and separates what God wants for us, which is to be united in kinship. Moral outrage does not lead to solutions. It keeps us from them. It keeps us from moving toward a fuller, more compassionate response to members of our community who belong to us no matter what they've done. And again, just thinking about these thoughts the last few months and getting ready for this class this morning, it just hit me so much how when Father Greg started Homeboy, he got so much hate mail for extending compassion to gang members, literally, actually even bomb threats. Why would you be extending compassion to people who have done this kind of violence to other members of our Los Angeles community? They deserve to die or be put in prison forever, not transformed, not helped, not loved. And yet the whole core of the power of Homeboy Industries, and some of you may know, just recently, for the first time ever, that an American nonprofit has won the Hilton Humanitarian Award. Homeboy won $2.5 million recently from the Hilton Humanitarian Award for the work that they've done. But it's all based on this. They belong to us no matter what they've done. But in a polarized state, not only does our creative, collaborative problem-solving capacity get lost, but we stop seeing other people, the people on the other side like us. We stop seeing them as people that want the best for their families, that want the best for their world, people that love God, people that care about other people. We start to believe, and this again is what happens again, those of you in intimate relationships can imagine this even on the small personal level. we begin to believe that our problem is you. If only you would think differently, do differently, be different, be more like me, things would be fine. But this is the very rhetoric that fuels hatred and violence, gang warfare, civil war. Arthur Brooks is a faculty member at the Harvard Business School and also at the Harvard Kennedy School. And prior to that, he was president of a conservative think tank in DC. It was called the American Enterprise Institute. He's written a book that I would recommend called Love Your Enemies: How Decent People Can Save America from the Culture of Contempt. And he talks about the fact that our anger and disgust that we feel for the people that don't believe like we do, our anger and disgust actually creates a culture of contempt. One of the things about that word contempt, John Gottman, many of you know John Gottman, who is a leading voice in the world of couples therapy, has done extensive research for decades up at the University of Washington, where he actually has couples come and stay in an apartment that is his laboratory that has cameras all over the apartment. And he and his graduate students watch every single encounter between a couple and have a way of scoring them. And over decades of longitudinal research, they have about a 98% accuracy rate of being able to predict which couples will be together in 5 years or not. And he said that there are 4 things they look for that are the most dangerous, the death knells of a relationship. He calls them actually the horsemen of the apocalypse. And they are criticism, stonewalling, and someone just talked to the hand, puts up a wall, defensiveness, and contempt. And when those things are going on in a relationship, they actually are the powerful enemies of love. Criticism, stonewalling, defensiveness, and contempt. But above all, contempt is the single biggest predictor that this couple will not stay together. Because think about what contempt, he says contempt is often the body gesture that signifies contempt is when people roll their eyes like, oh, brother. There's something about contempt. You are disgusting. You are ridiculous. I don't respect you at all. That's what contempt is. In Romans 12, very different than a culture of contempt, we are urged by the Apostle Paul to create a very different kind of culture. And I want you to indulge me because I'm going to read this whole chapter. So it is 18 verses, so hang in here. But I want you just to hear, this is a culture that I believe we're called to as followers of Jesus Christ to be nurturing, very different than a culture of contempt. Listen to this. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, or think the same, or vote the same, so in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. And if it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope. patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need and practice hospitality. These last verses are the ones that really stand out to me. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. And if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Very different culture than what we're living in right now. And what I believe is that these are not just idealistic platitudes. This is actually what it looks like to live rooted and grounded in God's love and living out the faith that we believe, that we can live this way because God's Spirit is at work in us, helping us be more and deeper than we are on our own. Wait just 1 second, I dropped my page. Okay, sorry about that. Father Greg talks about two words that are how we go about helping create this kind of a community. He talks about tenderness and kinship. And I want to add to that two other words that I'd like us to shift gears now and talk a little bit more about how to begin to heal. I want to add the words compassion and curiosity. So tenderness and kinship and compassion and curiosity. I think all of us know that the healing of our families, the healing of our communities, the healing of our churches and our country is not going to come from more information or changing people's minds. That is not what we need. The only thing that breaks open space for healing dialogue is tenderness and kindness. And that really powerful word, empathy. That is how we heal. That's what happens in the therapy sessions. That's why now, it used to be that Father Greg said it takes a job to stop a bullet. That was the first motto of Homeboy. And his idea was that if we can give people employment and we can bring, gang rivals together working in the different social enterprises of Homeboy, then we can help them begin to have a legitimate way to have a future and a hope. But now what he says is that what's really needed more than anything is transformation that comes through therapy. That pain that's not transformed is transmitted. And one of the byproducts of any good therapy is that we gain empathy. We gain empathy for what happened to us. We gain empathy for ourselves. And we begin to have a capacity to have empathy for people around us. Abraham Lincoln said once, "I don't like that man. I must get to know him better." Isn't that an interesting perspective? The person who, in that Doris Goodwin book about the team of rivals, he brought 3 people that had opposed him into his cabinet. When he became president in 1861, 3 of his opponents he made cabinet members. One of them, Chase, I just learned, continued to oppose him throughout the time that he was in office. And he knew that, and he did not get rid of him because there were gifts that Chase brought to the team that Abraham Lincoln said were very valuable for the country. So again, in this sense of kind of humility and being able to put other people's needs above his own, he tolerated someone who actually was working against him because he brought gifts to the country. Humility and vulnerability are what are required to treat our enemies with love. And curiosity is something that asks questions instead of makes assumptions. I think that's such an important trait. Again, as I said, like even when I go back to the arguments that Mike and I have, when I can stop being outraged at how I've been treated and I can begin to have curiosity about what is going on for Mike, What is he needing? What is he feeling? Not just focused on how I'm hurting, how I'm angry, but I can shift to that space of curiosity. What's going on with you? That's when things break open. And it's actually why what I say to couples all the time in therapy, believe it or not, your places of conflict are thresholds for deeper intimacy. Because it's actually the places where we get hurt and we get angry, where there's something to be understood by our partner. There's something that we need to understand, or that person needs to understand about us. So our conflicts, if we can approach them that way with humility and tenderness and curiosity, they can break open deeper ways that we know one another. Think of how often Jesus asked questions of his followers. Jesus, who was God, would ask questions all the time, wanting to know more. Who do you say that I am? That kind of question opens up so many possibilities, deep and meaningful dialogue. If we believe that every single person is created by God with intrinsic dignity and worth as a human being, even when people say or do things that are horribly hurtful to me, because they are beloved by God, they are worthy of respect and kindness. If we believe that all human beings are flawed, including myself, every single one of us can believe that we are flawed. We know we are. We're fallible. We consciously and unconsciously hurt other people all the time. We get it wrong. And if we believe that the solution to the brokenness in this world is never going to come from politics, politics is not going to fix this world. It doesn't address the deepest issues that matter the most to us anyway, which is our relationships. That the solution is only going to come from growing in our capacity to love. Like that quote that I gave to Carolyn for the blurb by Martin Luther King, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So I have a hope that at this time in our country's life where things are so deeply divided, more divided than ever before, I remember reading that after the 2016 election, 1 in 6 Americans said that they had stopped talking to a family member or a close friend because of the election. And I'm sure between 2016 and today, that's only gotten worse. Isn't that heartbreaking that family members are not speaking to each other over this? Before we move to a time of having some questions, I just want to close with a prayer of Paul's in Ephesians chapter 3 that I just feels very poignant to me. So I want to close with these verses from Ephesians chapter 3, 14 through 19. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. That's my prayer for myself. It's my prayer for each one of you, that you would know the depth and the height and the breadth of God's love, and that it would change everything. And that you would be filled, not with contempt or fear or moral outrage, but be filled with the fullness of God. That there could be healing, there could be conversations, that we could move forward. I mean, wouldn't that be exciting if there's ways that the family of God is what leads this healing process? That's a very exciting prospect to me. That's my hope. So I wanted to throw out a few questions, And then also if anybody else wants to write, it looks like there's a couple comments in chat or questions. I've not looked yet. Oh, I like, Faith said, we need a Red Cross of love, compassion, kindness, and equanimity. Want to start one? Yes, I do. And often people, it's also from Faith, often people who are not like-minded give the opportunity to see ourselves in what we attract and repulse. That's really true, Faith. The people that we get the most upset with, often there's so much self-awareness that we can learn by what triggers us. Why do I get so mad at that? But let me throw out a couple questions, and then if anybody else has questions, feel free to type them in the chat and we can have a discussion about that. These were just some that I wrote down. What has been your experience of being caught in an us versus them dynamic? What has that been like for you? How have we been taught to hate our enemies, not love our enemies? What step do you imagine could be a first step in showing compassion towards someone that you loathe? You know, I think one of the things that's so important is to show compassion and to have empathy with someone does not mean you agree with them. This kind of love does not mean you abandon your convictions. It doesn't mean that we're all going to see it one way. That will not happen. Again, going back to the intimacy of a marriage, a healthy marriage is not one where both people think the same way, but it's that there's space and there's interest and curiosity and patience and tenderness to make room for the other. So having empathy does not mean that you abandon anything about your convictions, but you begin to value a person more highly than your convictions. What do you think it means to break open space between you and a perceived enemy? And what prevents curiosity in you towards someone you dislike? I want to start with a story that my 57-year-old brother just got married for the first time in October. And he married a person who is in a different political place than the rest of our family. And on at the rehearsal dinner, she and I were in the kitchen and I just said, you know, we're going to be sisters. Tomorrow you're marrying my brother and you're my sister. And we don't see things the same way. And I'd love to hear more why you think about things the way you do. And I'd love for you to listen to me tell you why I think the way I do, just so we can get to know each other better. Well, my brother immediately said, I'm out of here. He left the kitchen. He had no interest in being a part of that. Like, and he kind of shot me a look too, like, Laura, really? Really? But we had a lovely conversation. I was a little nervous. My heart was pounding. My armpits were a little sweaty, but I want a real relationship with someone who's going to be my sister-in-law. And so it was a very, I would say it wasn't super long conversation, maybe 5-10 minutes max, but we started something that I hope we'll be able to continue over the years of making space to love each other and think very differently about some things that are important to both of us. So I'm not sure if anyone else wants to just pick up any of those questions about, if you want to share a story of maybe a bridge building experience like that, or what it's felt like to be stuck in us and them, or what keeps you from being curious about someone you dislike, or any other questions. Let's go ahead. So unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. Does that sound okay, Carolyn? Okay. We've got about 15 minutes, I think. Oh, come on. I know you guys are a talkative bunch. I know there must be questions about this. I'm sure it's not been easy. I know it's not been easy in your church. Like lots of churches, people that love each other are in different positions. And so,
Laura, Mike Beck here. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Pardon? I can't hear you.
It's Mike Beck. Can you hear me now?
I can, yes. Oh, hi, Mike.
Hey, I have a question.
Yes.
I just like to, well, I'd just like to hear more about the idea of love moving out fear. It seems to me that it seems like a hard thing to do. If you think about it in terms of a marriage where one party or the other is literally not safe,
Okay.
how the idea of love might move out fear.
Well, I think that's a really good, I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because there certainly are times where if we are afraid, if I am literally not safe, then that's not a time to lean in. We have to be able to be physically safe. You know, any relationship where there's any kind of violence that's happening, I don't do couples therapy, and it's not recommended in the field that you ever do couples therapy when there's the threat of physical violence, because you can't stir up vulnerable issues and try to work on that when one person's resorting to physical violence. So that's a different, I mean the kind of fear that I think is common in all love relationships. I'm afraid I love you more than you love me, or I'm afraid that I'm more invested than you are, or I'm afraid that you don't see me as your equal, or I'm afraid that you want to dominate or control me instead of partner with me. That's the kind of fear. But you're right, Mike. If the fears of someone's physical safety, you don't lean into that. You get out, you get safe. Does that answer that or helpful? Okay. Okay, one question that came up is, could you talk about when there's discrepancy between outer expressions of love and inner disposition? Okay, if what I mean by that is that there's a lack of congruence, that someone might be talking about being loving, but actually like it's more show, is that, I'm hoping that might be when there's a discrepancy between outer expressions of love and an inner disposition. Well, the first thing I guess that comes to my mind is that if there's ever a discrepancy between words and action, we all know what we believe, right? It's not even a question. And when it comes to love, so often what communicates love are things like eye contact and voice. You know, that what really makes a person feel loved is, you know, lots of times I'll have in therapy couples where they come in because they're feeling very angry or they're not close, and one partner will say, but I've done all these things. I've cooked these meals, I've taken out the trash, I've brought money into the home, I've done this, I've done that, I've done this, I've done that. And isn't that show love? But no, those are tasks, and certainly it can be a way of loving. But if like those kinds of outward tasks are not met with an inward, maybe this is what you mean too, an inward disposition of, I want to value you, I want to hear you, I want to know you, you know, things that have much more to do, I think, with, again, these words, tenderness and empathy. I think, you know, it's interesting thinking about this with the polarization. When I work with couples, what I'll say often is the two things that I will feel like I've been a successful therapist if I've helped deepen your self-awareness, if you understand more about yourself, your issues, you have a greater level of self-awareness, and if you have a greater level of empathy for your partner. If you can grow in self-awareness and empathy, you will be able to love more. So I do think those are two. I don't know if that's helpful. Okay, wait. Oh, no, the person said, I meant within myself, when I can communicate love and do a good job with active care, but inside I'm not loving them well. Oh, okay. So what I think you're saying then by this is that we want to be a loving person and we can do loving actions, but we don't always inside feel the kind of love we want. Well, I would say that starting by communicating love and doing a good job with active care is a very good place to start, as long as you're continuing to also ask God to help you with the inside stuff. that you're not just doing it, allowing yourself to nurture hateful, resentful feelings and going through the motions, but we're all in a process, I think, where our insides are becoming more loving. I mean, I think that's going to continue all our lives. And we often can start by wanting, I think in Matthew 5, bringing a cup of cold water, visiting someone who's in prison, clothing the naked. Those kind of loving actions are very important to God. But I think what's happening on the inside would need to be a part of the work as well. But that's a lifetime. I mean, those things are going to happen over a long, long time. I mean, I feel that again, even thinking of my marriage, that there's ways that I want to keep becoming a loving person, but I have selfishness in me. I have arrogance. I have a lot of arrogance and pride in me that rises up that I ask God to keep working with. Any other?
Laura,
Yeah.
I thought this was a very provocative discussion. I'm grateful for all of your insights, particularly on the intersection of the value of therapy articulated not only individually, say with the gangbangers, but also in terms of our body politic and social discourse. I'd be interested in your thought on this idea, particularly from a therapy standpoint. I'm very unhappy in our national discourse about the value placed on being a victim. And I think both sides play this, whether it be from the left or from the right. And I think it's very unhelpful. How does that tactic, that rhetorical tactic, translate into sabotaging or enhancing the therapeutic process when it's distilled to individuals as opposed to political postures?
Well, I think I understand the question. When someone comes from a victim position, it's a position of helplessness. It's a position of something wrong has been done to me. And so again, like I was saying before, it's like the problem is outside of myself. You're the problem. You're wrong. You're bad. I mean, I do believe that in therapy, sometimes what I have to do is actually help people who were abused as children acknowledge that they actually were a victim. And because I do believe there are children can be victims when they don't have power. But I also want to help that same person move now as an adult out of some place of just looking to the past and blaming a parent or anyone else who hurt them for everything that's happened for the rest of their lives, and be able to mobilize their own resources to take what's happened to them and do something productive and healing and transforming. Like there's resilience, there's a future and possibility, but that will not happen for someone who's in a victim. If you stay in the victim role, the only thing you can get is pity. You can kind of wrap a blanket of your resentment and bitterness around you and kind of hunker down. You can protest the wrong that's been done to you, but it's not a place of healing, because, you know, as we know, the only real person that I can change is myself. And so somehow shifting the power from they had the power and they hurt me with it to what is the power that I have in myself to heal, to change, to move forward, to do something constructive, even to see that there are ways that what has happened to me can become a tool of compassion. I mean, that's what I see with so many of the people I work with at Homeboy. Oh my word. Someone who has been incarcerated for over 17 years and then found out later that they were falsely incarcerated, but to see what they've done now to try to bring justice out of their experience of pain, they could either live the rest of their life bitter, or they could actually be transformed and begin to be incredible agents for justice. So I guess that's what I would say is victims, something's happened to me, someone else has the power and I've been hurt by it. And shifting that to, okay, even if that is true, what do I do now? What do I do today?
Thank you.
Someone wrote something I want to read too. When there may be one member of a family whose views are in opposition to the vast majority of the family, That person often feels ganged up on, yes, and is likely to be unreceptive to entreaties. I love, that's a great word, entreaties, to communicate and find a middle ground. How do you overcome this? What happens when you are showing that person love and compassion, but they still harbor those feelings of being isolated and marginalized because they know their views are so different from everyone else? You know, leading up to the election, a lot of clients talked with me about this situation, whether it was being in a family where their views were the minority. One woman who was actually an executive in a really large company, her views were in a minority to many of her colleagues. And she felt genuinely afraid if she was more open about what she believed, that it could hurt her job, that she would be ostracized socially, and even possibly it would hurt her position in the company. So I think what it sounds like you're saying is when you're trying to show the person love and compassion in your family, but they still harbor the feelings of being isolated and marginalized because they know their views are so different. I guess I would hope that we can establish in our families and in our churches that it is okay to have views that are different from everyone else. That is okay. We do not all have to believe the same to love each other. And I think it would probably be, I mean, that's not an easy place to get to the rest of family to. Like if the rest of the family's if they're going to say negative things, or let me back up too. I guess I would think also, if you know that you have this kind of diversity in your family, I think the people that have strong feelings need to be very aware of the way they're talking about their strong feelings. Are they putting down members of the other side in very degrading and demeaning ways? We wouldn't let that happen if they're making a racist joke or a sexist joke, but I think we have to see this in some similar kinds of way, that we can spew hate and division by the way we talk about people that believe differently than we do. And so that would be something I guess I'd want to say, is to be aware when the family's all together, to be careful and sensitive. Be sensitive, because if your goal is to try to create a safe place, I mean, that's another thing, talking about the connection with therapy. People change and heal when they feel safe. If someone doesn't feel safe, there's not going to be a lot of movement internally. There's not going to be a lot of dialogue. Again, they're in that survival place. They're hunkered down. It's not a place where love grows. Love can't grow if I don't feel safe. So I hope that was a little helpful.
I wanted to jump in a little bit.
Sure.
And in order to be safe, I'm going way back to childhood memory. And I don't know about American playgrounds, but I grew up in Brazil, and in Brazilian school playgrounds, from about the age of 10 to 15, maybe, there are a lot of playground fights. And usually a playground fight starts out with two people opposing each other on the playground, and they're huffing and puffing, and they're about to hit each other, but they haven't yet started. And a crowd begins to join around them. And the crowd wants to see a fight. And sooner or later, somebody will come up behind one of the opponents and push them towards their opponent. And that's what triggers the fight at that point. And because now you're in physical contact, and so now blows must be exchanged. And eventually they get old enough and big enough and strong enough where they can actually hurt each other. And then adults start jumping in and breaking up the fight and sending people to the principal's office and sending them home and all of that. But what occurred to me at that time, and it still does today, is that the real opponents in this conflict are the ones pushing you into the fight. And we're surrounded by people who want us to fight. We're surrounded, and this is where I think we are seeing this in our society, that we're surrounded by voices that are telling us we must oppose and fight with this other person. And it's one thing to sit there and say, that person is my enemy, and I will somehow learn to pray for them. I've experimented with that. It's a very powerful thing. You cannot remain an enemy of somebody once you learn how to intercede for them in prayer. There's something that happens, and you stop being enemies when you do that. But the hard thing is when there are other people around you that keep putting words into your ear that you must oppose that person and you must fight with them.
Right.
And it's almost like the person that you're wanting to fight with, that's not the enemy. The enemy is the person over here on the side.
Well, what I think about, what comes to me is why I was so struck by Romans 12, the power of that passage where it begins, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That I think we have to be really aware of what are the forces that I'm allowing to shape the way I treat people. And is this the culture of the kingdom of God? Or is it some other, something else that's going on that's pushing me towards division? And, there's some people that even say, when Paul writes about, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers, that anything in this world that is against love is some kind of power that's dividing us from God, is something that we have to be very aware of, that not to allow that to influence us. It's the enemy of God, the enemy of love. I want to respond. Some other people have written things in the chat, and I want to make sure before we stop, because we're going to have to stop in a little bit, that I honor that. One person said, what if the loved one you're trying to reach out to responds to your effort and attacks and lectures you on why you're wrong to believe what you believe, and then pulls away from you? How do you start the conversation over? That's a really good question, because I think that a lot of times what we do is we just avoid the conversations because we're so afraid that our family members are going to feel, if we don't agree, that somehow it's going to break relationship. And it has broken relationship. And so lots of people end up, what's that thing they always say? Don't talk about sex, religion, or politics. But I think that, again, if we can begin to create families where we say, I want you to know that I love you, that your value and your worth to me has nothing to do with your politics. I'm not going to let our differences politically divide us. I want you in my life. I love you. And our relationship is more valuable than us seeing everything the same way. And so somehow I guess you have to be in a place where you believe that, like the person is more valuable than you're seeing. And granted, these issues in politics are important, but are they more important than love? I think about when Jesus says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God.
Laura,
Yes.
this is Richard DeLosa, and the question that kind of started this off was mine, and I just saw Erica has a similar follow-up question. How do you have any advice in terms of how we can deal with that family member who, in my family, everyone who has one point of view is very open to hearing and understanding. We may not agree with the other point of view, but there's at least a willingness to hear, well, why do you feel this way? But with this particular family member, there's a lack of willingness to do that. In the opposite, we're not expecting a change. We're just expecting or would like to have this family member accept and acknowledge that we have a different point of view.
Yeah.
End of the story, full stop. Just that there are different ways to approach this. And this family member is just so dug in on the differences that it just shuts down any opportunity to have any discussions about issues that that may get political in any way, shape, or form. And I'm looking for a way to have the family move forward into a place where we're just not shut down into hi, how are you doing, great, just this absolutely surface level relationship, and we can profess all the love that we can for each other, but without being able to have those deeper conversations,
Right.
there really is no relationship.
Well, one of the things, I'm glad you brought that up because I know we're almost out of time. Carolyn said that we have to dead stop at 9:55. So I'm watching the clock, Carolyn. One of the things about love, I remember Henry Nouwen once talked about, and this kind of dates back to Cold War kind of language, but Henry Nouwen said, love is like unilateral disarmament. That when we approach someone in love, we don't know how they're going to respond back to us. And we can't guarantee that they will give us the same openness and dialogue that we want to give them. But I think that, in that idea that if you continue to not return evil for evil, not react to that person's defensiveness and stonewalling with your own criticism or contempt, but you continue to be loving and open, I mean, that's all we can do. We can't make somebody be in a place where they want to listen. But what happens so often is that we just begin, again, like in a relationship, we just react to each other. You hurt me, I hurt you, you shut me down, I get mad at you for that. So I guess what I would say is I just think it's a very loving thing for you to continue to communicate to that family member, we want to hear you and we love you, and know that you can't really do anything, and you can't do more than that, but that is a powerful thing. And sometimes I think the seeds of love that get planted, it may take a while. There's a woman at Homeboy named Crystal who talked about being in this was a juvenile detention facility. And there was a woman there who said to her every single day, Crystal, I love you. And I know that God has so much more for your life than you can even imagine. Crystal, I love you. And Crystal at first was like, what is this woman's jam? She was so turned off by that. But after months, it was maybe 7-8 months, one day she said it, and Crystal just realized something inside of her just shattered and broke, and she just began weeping. And it was almost like water on a rock, that love, that continual expression of love, unconditional love. Because that, if we believe what I read in 1 John 4, that's God. That we're carrying God into the world when we love like that. And that's a powerful thing. So, okay, it's 9:54. I'm so sorry that I didn't get to everybody's questions, but if anybody wants to email me, my email is just Laura Robinson Harbart @gmail.com, and I'd love to have a dialogue with any of you. We could talk on the phone or back and forth through email. I would love to continue the conversation, and really has been helpful for me, for the gift of getting to work on this class. Like I said, I have more than one family member who's in different places, and I've been wanting myself to figure out, how do I want to respond with the love of God to what's happening? And so I'm going to start small and have it grow, but this class is one part of it for me too. So thank you. And I
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you,
You're
Laura.
opening a lot of doors.
All right. Mwah.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Care.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Very
Bye-bye.
much.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Good
Bye.
to see everybody.
Nobody wants to leave.
No, we don't. We have so many questions.
Can we just stay in this moment?
Laura was fantastic as always.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
It takes you so deep and thorough. Wow.
You know, her very first topic at BPC, when Bill Barnes brought her to Couples Garden, was on grace, and I've never forgotten her words. And it was that next week that we invited her women's ministry team. I got to make the call to invite her to be our first retreat leader. And that's many years ago, mid-90s. And
She's so open as well as being knowledgeable.
Absolutely.
so just has grown with us and been such a spiritual guide and leader and partner with us. She's always partnered with us in those who have known on the weekends, we never want the weekends to even end, let alone an hour
So
here this
true.
morning. But we can carry what she's had to say to us all in our hearts and know that as seeds are planted, she's planted so many seeds, but it's all up to us to all nurture those and take care of them.
Carolyn,
Yes.
is this a single session program, or will she be back next week?
This is a single. Next week will be Rabbi Michael Gottlieb. And then we will be with Tom Toole. He has a wonderful series for this during the Advent. And we hope that Laura will be able to come back for a series. I'm not going to say when, because we've already planted a seed. We're hoping that it works for her. So that she can do 3 or 4, like Mark did 2 for us, and Daniel got to do 4. Some people have a schedule that allows them to do a little bit more.
Carolyn, you're just a hopeless tease.
You know, no, we've got a great team, and people are all, the team reaches out, and we all have our, and we have to pray about stuff, and we did a lot of prayer, and we knew and prayed that during these challenging times, we're blessed with our people that have been with us on the journey for many, many decades, and they're on the journey themselves, and that's what makes them so with us today. And
Is there a possibility that there's a tape of today?
yes, Mike Beck was taping this, and this will be
great.
This will be available, and I really recommend listening to it. I know that Laura East shared that she had listened to Mark Baker's, and she will be bringing words that he shared today in the sermon, and she touched on it on Thursday with the synagogue. So there's many ways. Our team is Julie Christensen and Mike Beck and Jody and Francie Goodrich. And so you can always give feedback to any of us, myself, and I appreciate your comment, Hall, on wanting Laura more. And trust me, I wish you were coming too, but I know that Rabbi Gottlieb will have a wonderful message and of hope and moving on. But I just always remember her touch on grace and how grace has been in every one of her times with us. And I think the women have had the most advantage, but we must get on with worship in about 1 minute.
How
So
will we be able to,
yes.
to access the,
You go onto the BPC.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Ellie. Thanks. Go onto the BPC website, and there should be a link for these talks. Daniel requested to not be recorded because of his lectures being part of LMU, and so they were only available to us while he was here for those 4 weeks. But Tom, Laura, Mark, and I know Rabbi Gottlieb all will be open to the recording, so you can go back and re-listen to them.
great, thank you.
Great.
Mike, thank you so much for allowing us to continue. And I don't know how many are on the, I see Julie and Jody, and then of course we always get input. I say we have a core group on the team, but it's many people that contribute their thoughts. And those of us on women's ministry have been extra blessed to have had Laura for many, many retreats. She's one of the most popular retreat leaders and many retreat leaders. And I quite honestly hope that even with officers that we can have retreats, mini retreats by Laura and Tom Toole and that, because there's so much to learn about leading and guiding our session and guiding our staff and leadership. So today, I think we had a wonderful turnout. We had probably over 60 people participating today, which is the highest it's hard to know because some people, when their photos are on, have two people there. So,
Yeah, we had over 65 logins and you had.
yes, and so, and many of those have double. So I knew we would have, and I'm just sitting here with one text message after another. And these are so valuable to share with family members. And last week, my son was on, he said, I couldn't come on video. He said, but he loved seeing Hall. My son, Stephen, remembers Hall from when Hall was very involved in the youth ministry. And my son was a real fan of Mark Baker's, having had wonderful direction from Mark during a troubling time from high school to college. And my son is an educational psychologist today. And my son listened, and my son, Bill, and myself had a conversation that evening that stemmed from Mark's talk, that it was a gift beyond, it was a God moment. And Bill opened up and talked about forgiveness in a way that it just was so healing. And so from these talks, it's the gifts that come after. It's the gifts that continue. So on for the day, right? And on to worship.
Okay.
And listen closely to Laura's talk today. And Laura is having a much needed break. And it was too bad that she was not able to be with her family, as many people during Thanksgiving. But I am praying that she has a real good block of time off to sort of take care of herself too. So, but she has a good sermon in store for us. So take care. Love you guys.
At 10 o'clock.
Yes, on.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye. And I know it's so hard to leave. It's so hard to leave.
It is. It's a great visit, seeing so many.
Oh, well, thank each of you. And we all love Laura, and we will have her back.
Thanks to the team.
Yep. Well, thanks to everybody who's participating and who will move forward with living out her messages too. Melinda, it's so good to see you.
Usually she's hiding her face. but
I see her. I see Melinda. Hi. Yeah, it's great. I can see we're all just so bye-bye. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you so much.